we spend at Amtrak buying stuff to run the railroad in Wisconsin. We buy stuff in almost all of the 50 states, even those that don't have Amtrak service. And we spent $13.6 million buying stuff from Wisconsin. And I can pop open the laptop and try to give you some idea what those things are, but in any case, we spent $13.6 million in Wisconsin in the last fiscal year. Our employees here, about 57 of them, we paid them about $4.7 million. So the investment that you make nationally in Amtrak and the investment you make stately in Amtrak pays off because it enables us to have this much service, this many employees, this much of an injection of money into the Wisconsin economy, and that makes a difference. So when you talk to people who are running for election next month about the difference Amtrak makes, in addition to providing great passenger rail service, we provide these economic benefits to Wisconsin. And of course, there are more than 62,000 Amtrak guest reward members here. I would bet you a lot of those folks are folks riding the Hiawathas, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So what are we doing now? As you might have heard, we've put an order in for replacements to the Acela Express train sets with US-built by Alstom next-generation high-speed rail equipment. We are using a federal loan fund that's not often used. There's lots of money in there for rail initiatives. We're using about $2.4 billion of it. This equipment will be built in New York. It'll operate in the Northeast Corridor because it'll be a little bit different than the Acelas are, which are basically fixed length. You can't add a car easily to an Acela train, but you don't really want to take the train apart if you don't have to. So, and we'll have more of them. Right now we're running Acela service about hourly between New York, Boston, and Washington. You'll be able to get this to every half-hour service. It'll get to speed faster. It'll regenerate electricity better into the system. And again, be built to the U.S. And part of that project is also to make station improvements in those locations, Washington and New York, and some investment in the Northeast Corridor infrastructure, including how to maintain this equipment. If you go to the Amtrak.com website, you'll see some very pretty animations of what this equipment will look like, at least according to the artist rendering. But that doesn't solve all of our fleet problems. Those leased P-42 locomotives, the Amfleet 1 cars, the Horizon cars, the Superliner cars, and the Heritage Dining cars. The Heritage Dining cars are older than I am, and I'm 59, okay? They, like me, born in the 50s, under the Truman and Eisenhower administration. The good news is, we've ordered replacements to that. The cars have been greatly delayed, but the first food service car came out of the shops in upstate New York in the last month, and we're out there testing it. So we are replacing these, okay? Horizon cars are pretty tough, but they've sort of taken delivery of those in '89 and '90. Those are the cars you would see every day on the Hiawathas. And they are a modified commuter car shell. We've been experimenting with the lighting in them, because I used to say you could perform surgery in those cars, they're so bright. So we've been working on some of that. And of course, here in the Empire Builder, we have Superliner 1s and Superliner 2s. Superliner 1s date back to '78. The Amfleet cars, which are the backbone of the Northeast Fleet, and we use a few Amfleet cars here in the Midwest, go back to '75. And the P-42s, which are great, durable locomotives that have saved the lives of engineers. There are people who, like those Chevy and Ford fans, those of you who are as old as I am, remember, oh, I'm a Chevy guy, oh, I'm a Ford guy. Well, back in the day, there were GM locomotive fans and GE locomotive fans. Even some of our GM locomotive fan engineers concede that these have been great, safe locomotives. Every day out on the railroad, every 2 hours, a train, usually a freight train, sometimes one of ours, makes contact with a person or a vehicle obstructing the tracks. And they're not indestructible. And we have lost engineers. And we have lost passengers during my time at Amtrak. But the fact of the matter is, those P-42, P-40 locomotives have been very strong in life-saving. They've saved the lives of our engineers. So we're not going to casually go forward and just buy a locomotive that doesn't meet very stringent standards. In fact, we are, with our state partners, getting new locomotives, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But either way, we have a fleet plan. We've shown the world what it costs to refleet the company. We have a plan to refleet the company if it's funded. So one of the legacies of the Borman administration has been an actual fleet plan that shows how we can do this and how much it will cost. Talking about new diesel locomotives, you will see, starting in 2017, new diesel locomotives here in the Midwest. They're going to be built by Siemens in Sacramento, California, just like our new deliveries of Siemens locomotives in the Northeast. They are going to have a diesel prime mover built in the Midwest by Cummins. So even though the locomotives are being built and assembled in California, there's a whole supply chain for it, including the biggest single component, the diesel prime mover, which is right inside there, being built in Columbus, Indiana by Cummins. So we'll be talking more about these locomotives as they arrive. And our state partners for these locomotives include Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, and that Badger state of Wisconsin. And their logos would appear here on the side of the locomotive. That's a rendering of what we think they're going to look like, subject to final approval. So 125 mile an hour capable. They'll get to 110 faster than the P-42s because they'll be geared and built for it. So for the two segments of 110 mile an hour spokes, we have out of Chicago, one in Illinois and one in Indiana and Michigan. They'll get to 110 faster, so we should be able to take time off the schedule, especially as more of the locomotives are delivered and more of the positive train controls installed. There are new rail cars coming for the state corridors too, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, Wisconsin. As many of you know, those rail cars did not pass the test that we put rail cars through in this country to be hardy and robust in cases of emergencies. They're redesigning them, we expect, and Arun and the states know this better than I do because they're buying them, we're operating. Putting through a redesign. There's optimism that the production is still possible next year, and they are going to be much like our rail cars in California, double-deckers, with electric doors that can be remote controlled. One of the problems we have in Hiawatha volume, moving 809,000 people a year, is the doors are not remotable. Someone has to go and unlatch every one of those doors. Someone has to go, depending on the platform, to drop the steps in the side of the car and put step boxes down. These will have lower floors, automated doors, more capacity, and built-in amenities. These, who knew when we started taking delivery of those Horizon cars in the 80s and 90s that there was such a thing called Wi-Fi and everybody will want it. So it'll be built in. Who knew that halogen lighting would be in place, that an LED lighting in place that uses less electricity and does a great job lighting your lap if you're reading a book or using your laptop? Who knew? So these cars, of course, will be built in with those amenities because they're being designed now. We look forward to seeing them. We're working with WisDOT and the rest of our state partners to make that happen. We very much want to see those cars in service. And I was told by Eldine that was going to be a question. So the slide was already in the presentation before I heard that question was coming, because it's an important issue here in the Midwest. It's also an important issue in California because they're getting some of these cars too. So what will more cars do? More cars will give us the ability to offer more frequent service. Right now there's two Hiawatha train sets bouncing back and forth all day long between Chicago and Milwaukee. And we're getting about as much as we could out of those two train sets. Right now there are 3 trains back and forth to Detroit and Pontiac. We in the state of Michigan want to increase that frequency. We in the state of Wisconsin and Illinois want to increase the frequency of the Hiawathas. To do that, you need cars. And what happens when you do that? Since 2006, when Illinois tripled the ridership by doubling the number of trains. The number of trains running between Chicago and downstate was doubled. That's an increase, and I'll update these numbers now that all my numbers I think are coming in, by more than 138% just by adding frequencies. We went from 3 round trips, Chicago, St. Louis, to 5, with no real speed increase, no real change in schedule, no real change in the equipment. Although Illinois did pick out some nice patterns for the fabrics and some of the cars they paid for us to redo, the fact is the service is pretty much the same. But by adding frequencies, you increase the utility of the service. The train is more likely to be going when you want to go, getting you there when you want to get there, if there's more than 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5 trains. One of the reasons the Hiawatha's are successful is because there are southern round trips. And even then there's huge gaps. The more likely it is the train is going when you want to get there, the more likely you are to take it. So despite what I may have seen some public officials say in the last week or two, that all you need to do is add another car or two to a train, that's not what drives ridership. What drives ridership is frequency. Buying new cars, adding to the fleet, buying new locomotives, adding to the fleet gets us more frequency. You may have seen our national ad campaign we're running on TV, the first TV campaign in anyone's memory has been running here in 2016 with 500 destinations and infinite stories. One of the challenges we face here, there, and everywhere is the last mile. When you get to the station, what happens next? Here at the Dell station, which was immaculately clean when I stopped by this morning to peer through the windows to see how it looked, and we have a fuss budget caretaker here, who once I stopped by here in the last year and was cleaning. It's hard to imagine I eat a lot of fast food while I'm out running around, but I do. I was cleaning fast food bags out of the company car. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? You can't empty your trash here. So it's good to have a fuss budget as a caretaker. I showed him my badge. I don't care who you are. You can't be dumping trash here. That's good. You want a fuss budget as your caretaker. But what happens when you get to a station? I mean, here I saw a cab service, a taxi service operating here in the Dells. Not every place has cabs. Here at the Dell station, they have key drop-offs for Avis and Hertz. Not every town has rental car companies. And once you get there, what do you do? So solving the problem between the last mile of your travel once you get to the station is part of what we need to solve to fix ridership issues. Now, Arun will tell you what we're doing in Wisconsin with the station developments we've been doing, but the fact is it's still an issue. And the stations themselves aren't always what we'd like them to be. I was once touring one of our Amtrak Eastern vice presidents around the Midwest, showing him the variety of stations we have. From great stations, like we have every station on the Hiawatha route is either new or next to new. Showing him stations elsewhere that are, in one case, was a plastic bus shelter and a burn barrel and a platform. That was the station. And the incoming vice president says to me, "Does Joe Boardman know about this?" And I said, "Well, yes, he rides the train, and he's seen this station." And that was in Waterloo, Indiana, by the way, which has now been finally brought up to a decent station. They took a old freight building and turned it into a real station. But we have a wide variety of stations and a wide variety of issues, including issues in Chicago Union Station. We have spent $60 million total in the last 6 years making improvements to Chicago Union Station. So if you are, for example, thank you. If you are a sleeping car passenger, or if you're traveling in business class on one of the Midwestern Corridor trains, you have our new Metropolitan Lounge. That's the upper level. It is more than twice the size of the old Metropolitan Lounge and seats a lot more people. And even then, I've walked through it now, and it still looks really, really full to me if I'm there between like noon and 3 when the people are changing from the Eastern trains to the Western trains. And in the late afternoon, let me see business class people on the Midwestern trains running through there. We have a new Legacy Club where you can buy a membership and get priority boarding if you're riding in coach, on a coach reserve train, like the other Midwest corridors. We have a new check-in process, just started this week for coach passengers in Chicago Union Station. Because we have open seating, people would stand on the granite or on the marble or on the carpet for an hour or more trying to make sure they are among the first to get on the train. Or if they're traveling with family, make sure we're all sitting together. Effective, we could go today. If you're a coach passenger, we want to greet every coach passenger on a reserved train as they get to the station, and offer them things like either Legacy Club, or if they're military, they get traveling in uniform, they get free access to the Legacy Club. They need to know that. Or if they're over 62, like a couple of us, we are here, or if you're traveling with family, we are going to use the South Boarding Lounge at the station. That area closest to the tracks for assisted boarding, for people 62 and over, people traveling with kids, people traveling with a disability, and out of uniform military. That area closest to the tracks is for them. And we want people to know that. We want to greet passengers as they arrive to tell them so. And when you do that check-in, you'll get a boarding pass with a letter, Group C, Group D, Group E, and a number. So instead of everyone standing around for an hour hoping to be among the first to board, the sooner you get to the station that day, the earlier numbered boarding pass you'll get, and we're going to call you up by groups. So instead of standing on that marble for a long time waiting to board, now I saw some of this work this week and there's some kinks in it and we're working on them. It should be a better boarding experience than it was, and no more hassle, in fact less, because you won't have to stand around waiting to see, can I get on before he does? Can I get on before she does? Because you're going to have a boarding pass with a letter and number on it. And you'll know about the Legacy Club, and you'll be offered the South Boarding Lounge access. And there are at least 6 places in the station to get these boarding passes, especially during the busiest part of the day. That, I think, is a huge improvement. Over here,